everyone. I'm Emily Walker from the United States Embassy in Algiers, and thanks so much for watching today's Let's Chat, where we're going to talk about American football. This Let's Chat is brought to you by the American Cultural Center Algiers, which is attached to the U.S. Embassy in Algiers. We also have cultural centers in 4 other locations around Algeria, in Constantine, Oran, Bashar, and Wergela. I encourage you to pay those centers a visit once they reopen. They all offer really fun things like conversation clubs, science clubs, English language books that you can check out, DVDs you can check out, and they often have talks like this one that you're about to hear. So I'd like to introduce you to today's guest, Laurie. Laurie is a political officer at the U.S. Embassy Algiers. She just arrived a few months ago. Previously, she was posted to Bridgetown, Barbados. She earned a bachelor's degree from the University of South Florida, and she grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And for anyone who knows American football teams, it should come as no surprise that Laurie is a huge Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So without further ado, I'm going to kick this over to Laurie. She is going to explain to you her love for the game of American football. I encourage you guys to ask questions in the YouTube chat, and we will ask Laurie those questions. Also, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can get notifications for talks like this. So Laurie, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for the very kind introduction. This is a topic that I'm particularly excited to talk about today. I love American football. Some of my earliest memories that I have growing up in Pittsburgh with my family is sitting around the TV, usually with my father, my uncles, my family. They'd come over every Sunday and we would watch football together as a family. And that's something that as I've moved and traveled around the world, something that I was able to take with me is my love for the game of football. And also everywhere around the world, I always tend to run into other Steelers fans who are happy to watch games with me or chat. So I understand that this is a very confusing game for a lot of people in the internet, from a lot of people who aren't American. So I wanted to take the opportunity to share my love and kind of explain how the game works, some of the basics, some of the controversies, and also some of the cultural implications of American football. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about how the game itself in the league in which it's played is structured. So basically the professional football league in the United States is the National Football League. We usually just call it the NFL. So if you hear people say the NFL, they're talking about professional football. Generally, the NFL plays the majority of their games on Sundays. In the United States, Sunday is part of our weekend. So that is something that people really like to sit around and watch football with their families and friends as they get ready for the long work week. So there's also football games on Mondays and Thursday nights, but primarily Sunday is reserved for football in the United States. Something else that I want to note is that there's also large universities in the United States all have football teams as well, and they generally play on Saturdays. Now, these are 2 separate league structures, obviously. So, for example, the Dallas Cowboys would never play the Texas Longhorns because the Dallas Cowboys are an NFL team, the Texas Longhorns are a college team. So hopefully that makes sense. College footballs are amateurs.
Be about college football, or is your talk about professional football, or both?
So my talk today is primarily about professional football, but I just wanted to make that distinction. College footballs are amateurs. Professionals are professionals, which means they earn a living and a salary from playing football. So, like I said, college players can't earn any money playing football until, if they are good enough, they get drafted by an NFL team once they leave college. The draft usually takes place in the spring, and it's a pretty exciting event because it allows the NFL to get an influx of new faces, new talent, and youth. So the way that the NFL is structured, there's 32 teams in the NFL. There's 16 in of those 32 teams, there's 2 separate conferences. The first conference is the AFC, the American Football Conference, and then the NFC, which is the National Football Conference. Each team plays a total of 16 games. And at the end of the season, at the end of those 16 games, 12 of those 32 teams will make it into the playoffs. And then the Super Bowl is the end of the playoffs, obviously, that crowns the winner. So how the game itself is actually played. I think this is what causes a lot of confusion. So I hope that I can kind of explain that a little bit today. So every American football game, including the Super Bowl, is divided into 15-minute quarters. So the standard field is 100 yards long, which is more or less like around 90 meters or so. The objective of American football is to score more points than your opponent. I mean, that's fairly easy. And the way that you do that is the offense tries to move forward against the other team's defense by either passing or rushing with the football in order to advance their way down the field. So the offense is led by a football position called the quarterback. And the quarterback and the offense get what's called downs. They get 4 downs to try to advance 10 yards down the field. Now, obviously, you can get more than 10 yards at a play, but you have a total of 4 chances to actually do that. So that continues until either the offense scores or the defense prevents the offense from getting 10 yards in those 4 tries. So the part about downs, I think, is very confusing to a lot of people. So basically,
it all sounds pretty confusing to me, someone who hasn't really watched football.
Right. And so I think that the reason why it's confusing is because if there's a 3rd down play, for example, the team who's on offense needs to get beyond those 10 yards, or they will need they'll need to punt the football using that last down, which essentially turns over possession of the football to the other team, and it ends their chance to score. So I think this is why sometimes people are confused about this, because they'll see a football play that looks like very boring, a bunch of people who line up across from each other, a short run happens, and people get really excited for what looked like nothing. And what that would typically be is that the team only needed, a foot or a yard to get that first down, and they got it, which is also a benefit for the way that the coaches and the football players use the time clock to their advantage as well. Okay, so I know that was confusing, so I'm going to take one moment and share a picture that hopefully will kind of straighten it out a little bit. Okay, so the red O's would be the offense. The blue X's would be the defense. So what would happen is the line in the middle is the line of scrimmage, which is where the wide receiver can run this way. The cornerbacks, it's their job to try to stop them. Or if they need to go and get only like 1 yard, as I mentioned, the quarterback can sneak through his offensive line and go from there. Or your running back or fullback can try to sneak through their offensive line too to open up those holes. Now, of course, there's always the option for a wide receiver to run a specific play going down the field, which could be a long play where they go like this, try to get past the cornerback or the safeties, and then run to the end zone for a touchdown. So hopefully that illustration made it a little bit more easy to understand. Okay. So moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit about how.
Laurie, can you hear me? Can I interrupt?
Yes, please.
I think that was technical, and that if people really want to get into playing football, you'd be a good coach for them on this. I'm interested to know, for like our Algerian audience who's watching, football is not popular in Algeria. American football is not popular. Soccer is popular. So maybe you could sort of explain this game in terms of soccer. Why, in your opinion, is American football a better game, a more interesting game, a more complex game? Like, what are some differences between American football and soccer?
That's an excellent, interesting question, and that's something that I've thought about a lot as an American. Even though soccer is growing in popularity in the United States, it's certainly not as popular as American football, baseball, basketball, or even hockey. And I think the reason for that is the United States. Personally, I think the reason for that is because the United States men's soccer team doesn't typically do as well on the world stage. Our women's soccer team, however, is something that I think that we can all be very proud of. I think that there are a lot of similarities in the game, being is that I think that, you know, for football fans in Algeria, they could understand the concept of plays being drawn up to try to get past the defender in offensive plays, trying to score their goals or their points. And so that's very similar to how it is in American football. It's just a lot, it feels to me a lot more technical, though I admit that I am not very well versed in these specific rules about soccer or football. So there's a few ways in American football that we can score. And the scoring system, I think, is also fairly complicated to understand if you don't know. So scoring can happen in a couple different ways. Obviously, the first one is a touchdown, and that's whenever your offense, either through running or throwing, gets the football into what's called the end zone. And that's essentially when you score the touchdown. Another way that you can score points is if you get to fourth down, you can attempt what's called a field goal. But you have to be close enough to the field goal for your kicker to be able to kick it through. And if they make it, they get 3 points. If they miss it, that is where the team will take over on the field. So it could be a benefit to them as well.
Laurie, is there a gesture that football fans do when somebody makes a field goal, when it's kicked through the goalpost?
Generally, very creatively. Well, this is also for scoring a touchdown as well, but this kind of, to me, looks like a field goal. So people will do that. So I actually,
a bit related to what you're talking about here, that just came in on YouTube. Plex Server asks, why is American football called football when you play it with your hands? It's confusing.
That is an excellent question. And I anticipated that someone might ask that question. So because I didn't know the answer, I went to Mr. Google and posed the question to him. And apparently I was not able to find the answer on Google either. So for today, the answer to that question will remain a mystery. I don't know why it's called football. It certainly causes a lot of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are times where you do kick the football, but I suppose your hands are touching it more. So, okay, Laurie's answer is it's a mystery. We'd have to go back to a historian for that one. So, Laurie.
All right, absolutely.
Talking about scoring maybe, but there are some other questions coming in on YouTube I'll ask you after.
Okay, well, I actually want to shift gears a little bit from the technical aspects of the game, because I expect that people have some questions. The NFL has had some controversy in recent years, and I wanted to take a few minutes to address that as well. So if you're not familiar with the controversy, I'll kind of explain what happened and where it went to and where we're at now. So basically, for background, in the United States, every professional and amateur sporting event starts by honoring America with a rendition of our national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. American custom dictates that during the national anthem, people stand, they remove their hats, and they put their hands on their heart while the national anthem plays. So in 2016, the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, named Colin Kaepernick, decided to protest racism and police brutality during the national anthem. So this created a very obvious controversy, but it also started a conversation. And the United States has a strong history of peaceful protest and resistance. The right to this, to peacefully protest, and assemble and to explain your views about things, even if they're not popular, is enshrined in the American Constitution. The only caveat is that these types of protests can't be violent. So after Colin Kaepernick did this, other players started to join him. Those types of peaceful protests continue to this day. But within that controversy, one of the things that happened that I think is very important is that it started a conversation about race in America, a conversation that is very long overdue. So now football players in the United States, they're quite famous. So they are now using their platforms that they have as football players to raise awareness and create change around issues that they care about. So the NFL supports a player-led platform to engage with, team owners, public officials, law enforcement, academic institutions, local communities, and just society as a whole to try to improve things where they feel that there is a deficiency. So basically the right that Americans have to peacefully protest is, in my opinion, as American as American football itself. So while many people, including myself, prefer to see our players stand for the national anthem, I'm certainly not going to argue that the controversy has led to some important changes and discussions within American culture. So I think that that is something that's important as well. Because, I'm sorry, Emily?
Thanks for addressing that. And it would maybe lead me into asking you a different controversy in American football that people are talking about in the YouTube chat right now. Let's see. I want to tell you a specific person who's asking this. Nora Moe said football's gained a lot of notoriety as one of the most dangerous games, and injury statistics prove that. And someone else mentioned, that concussions are fairly common in football compared to other sports. So interested in your thoughts on, is football this dangerous? And also, do you know if the NFL is doing anything to address that?
Yes. I would say first and foremost, yes, any contact sport is a dangerous sport. But I think what's even more dangerous is that it wasn't until recently we realized the extent of the concussion problems that was caused from players who played football. Unfortunately, if anyone saw the movie starring Will Smith that addressed this issue, the football player who was the subject of those scientific studies actually played for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 1960s and 70s. And it was the research that they did on his brain that led the NFL to understand more about the disease of CTE, which is essentially caused by when a person gets multiple concussions. So since we started learning about this, there's been a lot of things that has changed in football, and not just at the National Football League, at the NFL level, but throughout youth sports, starting at youth sports and working its way all the way up to the NFL. The NFL had been a major contributor to the research surrounding brain injuries, which is something that we can also use to support military veterans who had head trauma during their service, and other people who had just head injuries through things that have happened to them in their lives. So now the way that they play a lot of youth sports has changed. And I think another important cultural aspect of this is that a lot of parents, such as myself, who have sons, have to have the very important discussion about whether or not this is something that they would let their child do. And it's quite appropriate for me to be talking about this at this time because I have an 11-year-old son, and he's been asking me more and more over the last couple of years whether or not he could play football.
And what do you say?
So it's well, I got a reprieve this year because all organized sports were canceled due to COVID-19 crisis, but I have a feeling that come next year, we're going to be having the same conversation again. And at which point we can talk about it at that time. But it is a difficult decision. What I will say is that now that we know more about head injuries than we did in the past, there are steps that the NFL is taking to make the game safer. It's protecting the quarterback from egregious hits. It's instituted several rules that protect players from being blindsided or in particularly dangerous plays and things like that. So I think that as we learn more, the game is evolving in a way to try to take care of its main asset, which is the players, because that is the product that the NFL puts on the field that we all want to watch. And I think from my perspective, being a Steelers fan, we're used to seeing very like big hits, strong defense, all of that stuff. And I have to say that as I've grown and evolved as a football player or as a football fan and as a person, I've seen that I don't like those hits anymore because I know how dangerous they can be. Whereas in the past, a big hit was something that would really get the crowd excited and going. And there are still big hits in football, but they're teaching people from a young age to hit in places where they're not going to get hurt. Aiming for the shoulder pads, dipping the shoulder instead of hitting someone with your helmet. So those are the types of changes that are being made. And I think that it's going to allow the game to continue to grow, even through the questions about the concussions.
Thank you for addressing that. There's a comment that just came in on YouTube in response to when I said earlier that Algerians are not big American football fans. Hichem Benoit would like me to know that we love American football here in Algeria. He said maybe they don't actually play it, but they really love it, especially the Super Bowl. So apparently when the Super Bowl is broadcast, it's popular in Algeria. So that is good for us to know. So since this discussion, I like to do these Wednesday chats is some piece about American culture. So I'd like to talk a little more about the importance of American football on American culture. Specifically,
Right.
This is probably true with every sport, but America is huge. Different teams are from different states, and there's a real, you generally root for the team where you live. And this can be like a big cultural bonding thing you can have with other people. So perhaps you could discuss how having a favorite team and discussing that plays into like establishing relationships in America. And I just want to let you know that Terry Minot, who perhaps is of relation to you, wants to know, are the Bucks a better team than the Steelers?
I don't know that I could, the answer is obviously no. The Steelers are statistically much better than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with our 6 Super Bowls and history of greatness. Whereas, although I do give Tampa Bay credit for winning 1 Super Bowl, but they have a little bit of catching up to do if they want to be as good historically as the Pittsburgh Steelers.
So a great example.
That actually.
Kind of discourse you can have around ribbing somebody about a sports team. We would also call this probably talking trash. So maybe you could discuss that a little too.
No, absolutely. And that's, in my opinion, one of my favorite things about being a sports fan. I think these friendly sports related arguments are a very important part of the way that Americans get to know each other. The United States is obviously a huge, diverse country, and we, in general, Americans tend to identify with the place that they're from, the city that they're from, or the state that they're from, or the community that they're from. And so I think that, being able to maintain your sports fanhood, even after you leave the place that you grew up, is an important part of an American's identity. And on the other side of that too, I think the teams take on the identity of the cities that they represent and the people who live in that city. And I'll give another example about the Steelers. So my hometown is famous for its steel production in the early in 120, 30 years ago, that was what Pittsburgh was known for. And so that's where our football team got its name, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Another example is there's a football team in Green Bay, Wisconsin. It's a very small town in Wisconsin, but that's the Green Bay Packers. So Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin, is famous for its dairy farms and its cheese production. So then the name of the Green Bay Packers came to honor Wisconsinites who made a living packing cheese in the dairy industry. And there's a lot of different examples about that. So I think that, again, one of the best things that we can do is talk a little bit of trash. Or if you run into someone outside of your city who happens to be from your city, you always have common ground to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or whatever it is, the team that you grew up watching. I think
I was just going to add to that what Laurie said. This is so true especially for us Americans who live abroad. If you run into somebody, for instance, I'm from Detroit. So if somebody finds out I'm from Detroit, they might say among the first things when meeting me, you're a Detroit Lions fan. It's the football team. Or you're a Detroit Tigers fan. That's the baseball team. This is a major cultural thing that Americans do.
Yes. And it makes it fun. And oftentimes it's even funner whenever you meet someone from a city that is your team's rival. So for example, the Pittsburgh Steelers' biggest rivals are the teams that play in its division. So that's the Baltimore Ravens, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Cleveland Browns. So if I talk to, and the Steelers have had a lot of success. The Browns in Cincinnati have not had so much success. They're actually historically fairly bad. And that's an objective opinion based on the number of wins and losses that they have, not just because they're the Steelers' rivals. But it's very easy whenever I meet someone from Cleveland, I already know the first thing that we're going to talk about, and that's the Browns and the Steelers. Same thing if I meet someone from the city of Baltimore. Now, Baltimore has a good football team. And that team has been consistently good for a long time, which makes me hate them really badly because they've broken my heart a few times by beating Pittsburgh in important games and things like that. But it's something that we can always talk about, and it's a common thread that we have that kind of weaves through our lives as we go and travel the world or travel the country or whatever we do. This is something that we have that I think is very important to bring us together. And it's also something that it's uniquely American, but it's something that I think we love so much that we want to invite everyone else to come and enjoy and love the same thing that we do. So I hope that this type of discussion gets everybody a little bit more interested in American football, and you'll end up loving the game, learning the game and loving the game in the same way that I do.
So if an Algerian was to go to a football game in the United States, what are some cultural things they should know as a fan? I once went to a soccer game when I lived in Spain. I went to a Real Madrid game, and I made some faux pas. I culturally did not understand some things that were going on there. It was a very different cultural experience. So if an Algerian were to be in the United States watching a football game, what would you tell them before they go?
I would say that probably the most important thing is to just enjoy yourself. You get a lot of different types of football fans. You get the people who enjoy what's called the X's and O's, the technical aspects of the game, and they might be a little bit more reserved in their fandom. You have the other types of fans that are yelling and get their faces painted, and they really do this type of thing, and really, gregarious with the way that the way that they show their fandom. So I don't know that you can necessarily go wrong. I would say that certain teams have better fans than other teams. And if you are going to a place such as Pittsburgh or New England or a team like, these very well-established teams or the Dallas Cowboys, you can certainly wear the other team's jersey if you are a fan of that team. But I would say if you're not a fan of that team, probably not. It's not worth upsetting the apple cart. Now, one of the things that's fun.
Wear the colors of the team that you're rooting for. Is that something you would advise people?
Yes, absolutely. It helps you feel like you're part of even if you don't fully understand it, and even if you've never been before, it helps you feel like you're part of it. And I think that's an important part of the NFL fan experience is feeling like, we all are in this together, whether you win or whether you lose. You're either going to be happy together or you're going to be sad together. So I think that's something that if you travel. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. I think that's a good point. It's a feeling of kind of community that is what's so fun about being at a sports game. Also, there's really good food at professional games. So that's maybe my favorite part of going to sports games, lots of good junk food. What are some expressions that Algerians might want to know if they're watching, say they're watching the Super Bowl on TV, or if they're watching the game in person? What are some things you say as a fan while you're watching? Like, do you say, "Oh, ref, you're wrong"? Like, what are some expressions that you might want to say?
Let's see. I would say the ref is blind.
Ref is
ref, when was the last time you got your eyes checked? And you would say something. Yes. And that you would make that the referees have a tough job to do. It's a very fast game and they do the best that they can, but sometimes they miss calls. So people tend to like to take that out on the refs, whether it's fair, whether it's not. Usually they do a pretty good job, but every once in a while there are some egregious calls. So I would say you can always get on board with blaming the refs for something. That's something that's pretty appropriate most times. Some other things that they would talk about is some of the there's a lot of nicknames for certain very famous units, and a unit would be like the unit of offensive linemen, or maybe the secondary, which is the cornerbacks or the cornerbacks and the safeties. So a couple things that you might hear that don't make sense is, for example, the Minnesota Vikings, they had a very, very good offensive line at one point. The Minnesota Vikings, their colors are purple and gold. So they were called the Purple People Eaters, which is just a funny phrase, but that refers to their offensive line that they had probably in the 80s or something like that. Same thing, the Pittsburgh's defense in the 60s and 70s, it was so good, no one could score on them that they called it the Steel Curtain defense. Let me think of a more recent one. The Seattle Seahawks, they had an excellent core of cornerbacks and safeties, and they called them the Legion of Boom, which is obviously a play on, what is it, DC or Marvel Comics, Legion of Doom? I'm not sure. I don't know anything about comics. But in either case, some of these nicknames might come up that you're like, what are they talking about? And it's probably in reference to either an individual or a unit of players.
Okay, so you'll very much impress people if you knew some of these specific nicknames, but when in doubt, when you see a bad call, you should say the ref is blind, and you'll fit right in with,
yes,
with people watching football.
Absolutely.
Laurie, a couple people wonder, including Hisham, asks, do you play football or are you just a fan?
No, unfortunately, I am not particularly athletic. So I didn't grow up actually playing any sports. Usually, football is generally played by boys and men, but there are some instances where they're like my high school had one game that they played with the high school girls, and so they're trying to open it up a little bit. At the college level, there have been some kickers who played at the college level who were women. And most importantly, I think, is that there's, in the last few years, there have been several NFL teams that have hired women as coaches. I know San Francisco has hired the first female coach probably 2 or 3 years ago. I know there's a female coach on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as well. And in addition to that, the referees, there are also several female referees now as well. So I think the game is expanding to women, even if it's not necessarily expanding on the playing side of the ball. But I for one am very happy to see female referees and see that we're able to call them blind just as much as their male counterparts. I think that that's an important area of growth, to be able to see women being hired in these types of positions. And more importantly, the men that work the men that work with and for these women respect them for the position and the job that they're doing.
Yes, agree. Women in leadership positions, this is a good thing and a good movement. So you didn't grow up playing. You talked about this a little at the beginning, sort of the importance of watching football every Sunday and the impact that had on you growing up. Could you elaborate a little more on that, on how football has kind of being a fan of football has had a positive influence on your life socially or with family?
Yes. So that is one thing that I always look forward to whenever I make it back home to Pittsburgh, is trying to go to a football game if I can make that work out. But even if I can't, I know that if I have friends or family members that I haven't seen in a few years, if there's a football game on, I can reach out and say, hey, what are you doing for the game? And it will always be, well, we're going to go to this restaurant and watch the game, or I'm having people over at my house bring something and join us. And it becomes a very important part of, again, community, maintaining friendships, etc. For me, living overseas for the last few years of my life, one thing that I notice is it helps me maintain relationships with my friends. When a football game comes on, and I realize, oh, I haven't talked to my friend Wayne in a while. First thing I do is I pick up my phone and I WhatsApp him, because I know that he's watching this game. So it helps keep us connected, and it helps us to maintain these friendships that it's a difficult thing to do when you live in a foreign country like I do. So I think it's very important from those aspects. And I feel like a lot of people will look to anything to kind of maintain and grow their relationships and friendships with the people that they care about.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And for all of us Americans who live abroad, having a big Super Bowl watch party, even though they're usually at odd times for us, like the game might start at 6 a.m. with the time difference, but this is still a big thing of Americans living abroad, as we like to watch the Super Bowl together. Laurie, I have a question that came in also from Hisham Benoit. He wants to know if there's an opportunity for young Algerians to become professional football players in America. Maybe you could sort of answer that by, are all professional football players in America, were they all born in America? Or is there an opportunity for someone from another country to be a professional football player?
Yes, so that's actually a very interesting question. One of the things that's been happening over the last few years is that American football teams have been expanding where they look for talent. As I said at the beginning of this talk, the majority of professional football players get drafted from their football teams at the university that they attended. However, in recent years, there's been opportunities for people who are not American to play for professional football teams. And generally, there's been a few rugby players. And then also there's been a lot of soccer players that they would bring in to see if they could be a good kicker, for kicking field goals or punting. And so there has been a little bit of an influx of foreigners that come into the United States and play professional football. In fact, speaking of good nicknames, there is a punter. I don't know who he plays for at the moment, but his nickname is the Scottish Hammer. And he was actually, from Scotland, but came in and was able to convert his soccer skills into American football. So the opportunities are there as long as the dream is there. And I think that as some of these players are able to to show that they can be successful in American football, I think that's something that teams will certainly be open to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. So yes, you don't need to be necessarily American to be a NFL player. There is a rivalry that someone just asked about. Nora Moe asks, is there some sort of rivalry between baseball and football as national games? As I'm sure you know, the moniker the national pastime of America. I believe it's the national pastime of America. There's some, should that be baseball? Should it be football? There's some debate over that. So what do you think? Is there a rivalry between baseball and football as America's national pastime?
I don't think that there is. And there's a few reasons for that. I think because the games are so very different, I don't think that there is necessarily a rivalry between the two sports. I also think that because the seasons only overlap for a few months, it's not, fans aren't being drawn from one game to the other, and they're not forced to pick between, to choose one. They can follow both. And I say that because baseball starts obviously in the spring and it finishes with the World Series, which is done in October. Now, for football, it starts in September and then ends with the Super Bowl, usually the first weekend of February. So there's only a small amount of overlap between the seasons of those two sports. So I think when they call baseball the national pastime, that goes back to the days, like 100 years ago, when people used to listen to baseball on the radio. And it's a compelling game to listen to, baseball, with the statistics and with the descriptions and those different types of things. Football, I think, is more interesting to actually watch than baseball. So I think it all depends on what type of fan you are and what you're looking, what your interests are. So I think there's room for both.
Thanks. So outside of professional football, which you've addressed, it can be a dangerous sport, is at least a very physical sport. Americans do like to play football themselves, not at that level, but maybe you could discuss the kind of important casual games and what that looks like, how people adapt it to play flag football, or that a lot of people will play football on Thanksgiving Day. That's traditional, is that you will, maybe some people have seen this on a episode of Friends, for instance, when they bring their football out and play on Thanksgiving Day. That's a fairly common thing in the US.
Yes, it is. And I think it's very interesting. I'll go back and talk about my family for a moment. I have some nephews who are, young adults at this point. And ever since they were, 10, 12 years old, they would get together with their friends at the elementary school that I went to near my parents' house, and they would play what they called the Turkey Bowl. And so obviously, as they've gotten older and, became, from boys to men, they've gotten a lot better and more skilled at these games. And the thing that's interesting is my 11-year-old son always asks, when we make it up to Pittsburgh for Thanksgiving, if he can go and watch his cousins play in the Turkey Bowl. So that is a tradition but it's a new tradition in my family because it's obviously from the generation younger than me. My nephews and my son. So that is something that I think a lot of families do. And speaking of the American holiday of Thanksgiving, that's on a Thursday. That's always on a Thursday, and that's a day that the NFL has 3 games on, and it's always the Lions, it's always the Cowboys, and now I forget. But there's always 3 football games. So basically, it's a very fun way that you can sit around and.
That's where I'm from, so it's the one we would always have on the TV.
Right, absolutely. So I think that's another part of the way that that football has kind of injected itself into American culture.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think that we're about we're about out of time. But if you want to have any closing thoughts, Laurie.
Well, I just want to say I was very happy and I'm grateful that I was able to share the love of my favorite game with my new Algerian friends. And I hope that this talk that we did today can pique people's interest and want to learn more. And also, I hope that I managed to create some new Pittsburgh Steelers fans here in Algeria as well.
Where can people go if they want to learn more about football, watch a football game? What are some suggestions?
You can generally find a lot of that on a lot of the information on NFL.com, and it'll give you options to subscribe to be able to stream games. or there's also other streaming sites that sometimes can pop up. But I would say that it's you can also watch the nationally televised games as well. And I think that those are available for streaming from NFL.com. I could be wrong, but
Okay. And when is the Super Bowl?
the Super Bowl will be the first weekend of February.
Okay.
As long as things are still going according to plan with COVID.
Okay. So TBD on that, to be determined. Laurie, thank you so much for sharing your enthusiasm. I am not a football fan, but I'm a little more excited about it now. So yes, I hope some Algerians are a tad more enthusiastic for football. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching on YouTube. Please do hit the red subscribe button so you don't miss out on other talks like this. We generally do these talks Wednesday at 4 p.m. So we hope to see you for an upcoming talk. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Have a good day. Bye.